welcome back, General. In this video, I'll be providing you with an in-depth look at the faction known as the Global Liberation Army, or GLA for short. This will include the origins of the organization, the strategies and tactics that they used, and the faction's arsenal, including their structures, weapons, vehicles, and infantry roles. This will be a long video, presenting a lot of information, so I'd recommend grabbing yourself a drink and a snack before starting. And feel free to pause the video anytime if you feel you need to take a break. There's a lot to go through, so let's get started. We don't know exactly when the organization known as the Global Liberation Army was formed. The earliest date on record comes from the dossier regarding the GLA's most infamous general, Dr. Thrax. Quoting from the dossier, "Little is known about the GLA associate codenamed Dr. Thrax. While background intelligence indicates that he received training as an immunologist in Jordan, he left academics in 1995 and disappeared into a GLA-controlled ghetto in Cairo. So we know that a GLA cell was present in Cairo, Egypt in the year 1995. However, this does not necessarily mean that Egypt is the origin point of the organization, or that it had not had other cells established in other parts of the world before 1995. The next bit of information I'll be presenting is mostly speculation on my part, based on other events that occurred before the official outbreak of the war against the GLA, so some of it could be open to further interpretation or critique. The roots of the organization began somewhere in the countries of Central Asia. I believe that the GLA initially formed around the year 1988, near the end of the Soviet-Afghan War. At that time, the organization was responsible for recruiting and training people from various parts of the Middle East, in order to combat and expel the Soviet military in Afghanistan. When the Soviet Union withdrew from the conflict in 1989, the GLA leaders then looked to expand the organization, both in its purpose and in a literal sense. While the organization was initially set up to counter Soviet influence and aggression in Afghanistan, it expanded this goal to counter all foreign influence. Not just in Afghanistan, but the entire Middle East and Central Asia. This expanded goal meant that the GLA began to establish hidden cells in various countries. The 1991 Gulf War led by US and coalition forces only served to reinforce and perhaps even radicalize the GLA's ideological cause. While the GLA may not have supported the actions of the Iraqi government that triggered the war, they also didn't support the US and its coalition forces intervening in such matters. Further compounding the issue was the USA's establishment of an increased military presence in some of the Middle East countries that it already had influence over, such as Operation Southern Watch in Saudi Arabia. This would lead the GLA to carry out much of the international terrorist attacks that took place throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. At the turn of the 20th century, in an attempt to root out and destroy GLA-controlled cells, the USA ramped up counter-terrorist initiatives in the Middle East. While these smaller conflicts may have hampered GLA operations in parts of the Middle East, it only helped to draw more support for the organization and its cause. So much so that it was able to build up and maintain a stronghold in Central Asia, particularly in the countries of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. More specifically, both Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan were merged and renamed to Aldistan by the GLA. This is according to recorded briefings that occurred before and during PLA military operations in the region during the war. Bishkek, the former capital city of Kyrgyzstan, was considered the sub-capital of the now GLA-formed country of Aldistan. The capital of Aldistan was the city of Dushanbe, the former capital of Tajikistan. In order to build up more support for its cause, the GLA would send envoys into Western China in an attempt to establish an independent state in this remote region. However, this would only serve to agitate the Beijing government, and ultimately culminate in a war, which saw the USA and China cooperating to destroy the GLA once and for all. It's important to note that the GLA did not have full control over Kazakhstan before the war. Once China had successfully pushed the GLA out of Aldistan, it would regroup its forces in Kazakhstan, eventually pushing both PLA and US military forces out of the country. Afterwards, Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan, became the new capital of the GLA, and was renamed Akmola. One of the unique aspects of the GLA was that they didn't have a single leader that unified the organization, at least not initially. It can be best described as a loosely aligned worldwide network of terror, one that was made up and run by several warlords and rogue generals of the Middle East, who would create and execute their own plans to engage and defeat their enemies. The organization was split into various cells, with each one operating semi-autonomously. For example, Prince Kassad was the leader of the cell entitled Cobra, which operated in regions of North Africa. Kassad himself was a man that specialized in camouflage and ambush tactics. To quote from his dossier, "This charismatic tribal leader has organized spies and assassins across North Africa to do his bidding. Prince Kassad has been paid millions for assassinations, hijackings, and beatings in the street. For a 3-year stretch beginning in 2008, it is believed that no terrorist action was taken on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea without his involvement or blessing." Another figurehead within the GLA was General Radal Jazi, an explosives expert who operated the Scorpion Cell, which was located somewhere in northwestern Iran, close to the Caspian Sea. Dr. Thrax was not affiliated with any cell that we are aware of. This could be due to his significance within the organization, or perhaps he often transferred from one cell to another, never permanently settling down into any specific one. This disconnected structure meant that even if one of the GLA's important leaders died, the organization would continue to function, making it difficult to fully destroy. The USA would come close to the end of the first major conflict against the organization, when they assaulted the GLA capital of Akmola in Kazakhstan, killing many of its vital commanders. This caused the GLA to be disorganized for a short time, but eventually it reunited under a single leader, one with a clear vision for defeating their enemies. The organization knew that it couldn't take on technologically advanced nations like the United States in a straight-up fight, nor did it have the manpower and equipment to overwhelm the People's Republic of China. The CNC General's Manual actually gives a good description of the GLA's overall military strategy. Information has begun to trickle in about the organization and strategies of the Global Liberation Army. A loosely aligned worldwide network of terror, the GLA prizes speed over destructive force. Relying heavily on the dedication of fanatics, the GLA sends soldiers into the teeth of its enemies and always has an escape route for its hardcore veterans. Built to hit and run, the GLA is poorly suited for direct large-scale battles. Generals of the GLA seek advantages in the terrain. Without the official backing of any national government, the GLA has become expert in making do with whatever is at hand. GLA units have been known to scavenge resources from the field of battle. Through its network of tunnels, GLA forces can appear at locations all over the map. If they are successful in defeating their enemies, GLA units earn money from the cause's unknown backers. The GLA fighting units tend to be lightweight and low cost. The most effective of them self-destruct, making a sustained campaign against enemy forces difficult for the GLA to maintain. The GLA has become expert in acquiring dated weapons from the Soviet era. Through arms dealers and the black market, it can assemble squads of tanks and technicals, which, when rapidly deployed, can put a dagger through unsuspecting enemy defenses. A couple of key missions that showcase the faction's strategy during the 2 major conflicts against them was Operation Black Rain and On the Waterfront. In Operation Black Rain, GLA forces attacked a Chinese base by distracting its guards using their fast technicals. While the Chinese troops were distracted, bomb trucks rolled into the base, destroying vital structures, and leaving the rest to be cleaned up by their light vehicles. The small force would then regroup and rearm at a nearby base before launching an attack on a nearby dam. By destroying this dam, they were able to flood the valley and drown all other PLA forces along the banks of the river.
Behold, doom has come to our enemies. Like a tide, we shall sweep over them and drown them in their own greed and evil.
During the 0-hour phase of the war, the GLA tasked one of their commanders with a mission called On the Waterfront. This mission involved the theft of a US particle cannon to be used against its own Mediterranean fleet. The GLA employed hijackers, quad cannons, and tunnel networks to complete the mission. The hijackers would, well, hijack US vehicles, which were usually better armed and armored compared to the GLA's. The quad cannons would make sure that no aircraft or helicopters could fly over the islands without the risk of being shot down. The tunnel networks allow the GLA commander to move his forces from one island to the next, ambushing and taking out the rest of the US military forces on the islands. By now, the captured particle cannon was fully powered and charged, and the GLA used it to destroy the nearby US carrier. These two missions prove that the biggest mistake one can make against the GLA is to underestimate them. The GLA may not have the most powerful weapons, or quantities of them at their disposal, but they can certainly plan their way around such systems with more flexible tactics, or just outright steal said weapons so that they can be used against their enemies. Now, General, it's time to go over the various structures, infantry, vehicles, and other weapon systems that the GLA used to wage war against the USA and PLA forces. Though the GLA did not have advanced high-tech weapon systems, their arsenal was quite varied, especially since the GLA would capture any weapons and equipment they could use to further their cause. Of course, the GLA made use of structures and other buildings to train troops, build vehicles, and purchase other supplies and equipment. In a large city, GLA structures tend to blend into the community around them. Hoping that they go unnoticed, GLA generals have chosen not to fortify their structures, knowing that new ones can be erected quickly and cheaply in a new location. There are a couple more things that separate the GLA structures from those used by the US and PLA. The first was that none of them needed power plants in order to keep the buildings functioning. The second was that when destroyed, the structures would leave behind an escape hole. This hole can be seen amongst the ruins of the building. If the hole itself is not properly destroyed, then a worker would emerge from it when he thinks there are no enemy forces nearby. The worker would begin immediately rebuilding the destroyed structure, allowing the GLA to quickly re-establish operations in the area. The first and most vital of the GLA structures was the command center. This was a single square building with a large dome on top. It was surrounded by walls on all sides, with one opening that acts as the entrance. In addition, there are 4 guard towers at the corners, with one of the towers having what looks to be a radio beacon on top of it. The command center is where the GLA commanders would plan and coordinate their forces, as well as the place where they would recruit and train workers. The radio beacon allowed the commander to call in reinforcements or other forms of support from outside their local area, such as camouflaged rebels to ambush unsuspecting enemy units, or a plane to drop an anthrax bomb on a targeted location. The second structure was the supply stash. It had a main building where the GLA would recruit and train workers, and a shed next to a storage tank. It also had a small hut with a dome on top, which might have acted as a guard post. These structures were partially surrounded by a wall. As the name implies, this structure, or set of structures, acted as the main storage for collected supplies. Workers would go back and forth, picking up supplies from a dock or elsewhere, and dropping them off at the stash. From here, the supplies would be processed and either put to use for the GLA, or sold in order to generate funds. The third structure was the barracks. Not so much a structure, but more like a small compound. It was surrounded by a wall with one entrance. The main structure is in the middle of it, recognizable by the small dome on top. There are 3 other smaller buildings in each corner of the compound. A few crates under a canopy at the 4th corner indicate that these huts may have been used to store additional small arms weapons and equipment. The barracks was where all infantry of the GLA were recruited and trained. This included the Rebel, RPG Trooper, Terrorist, Angry Mob, Saboteur, Hijacker, and Jarman Kale. Rebel infantry would get the most out of being trained at the barracks, learning how to capture neutral tech or enemy buildings, as well as how to booby-trap neutral structures, or even their own buildings. The 4th structure was the arms dealer. When the GLA needs vehicles, it comes here. The local arms dealer can acquire or build fine weapons from all over the world. There are 3 structures here. First, the garage in the middle, which is where the GLA acquire or build their own vehicles. Second, a smaller structure at the entrance, which seems to be a guard outpost. And third, another building next to the garage, which may act as storage for vehicle parts. At the entrance to the arms dealer is a showcase of weapons on display under a metal canopy. The arms dealer provides the GLA with technicals, radar vans, Scorpion tanks, quad cannons, toxin tractors, combat cycles, marauder tanks, rocket buggies, bomb trucks, battle buses, and scud launchers. The arms dealer can even outfit the Scorpion tanks with custom-made Scorpion rockets for extra firepower. The fifth structure was the Palace, the source of secrets for the GLA. It had one large square-shaped building in the middle with a dome on top, and two smaller square buildings on each side. A fountain is located in front of the main building. A wall surrounds the structures, except at the entrance, which has two guard posts topped with domes. The palace held various secrets, plans, and research documents for the GLA. Therefore, it was almost always better guarded compared to other structures. It was typically garrisoned with troops, practically turning it into a small fortress. This made the structure virtually impossible to capture by enemy forces, making it necessary to simply destroy the entire palace. The palace could be fortified with barbed wire, wooden planks, and sandbags. These fortifications could be applied to the GLA's other non-defensive structures too, including the fake ones, increasing their armor. Some of the research the GLA conducted at the palace included outfitting their rebel troops with camouflage, developing special toxin shells to equip some of their vehicles with, arming mobs with AK-47 rifles, and improving the effectiveness of their bioweapons with the development of Anthrax Beta. The sixth structure was the Black Market. The GLA knows how to use the shifting hidden markets of the world. Through its Black Market, the GLA can acquire hard-to-find ammunition and technologies. Additionally, through its activities in the market, the GLA can earn a small yet steady income. The Black Market was most recognizable thanks to the tower in the middle of it. A couple of smaller buildings and market stalls surround the tower. While the market seems innocent on the outside, on the inside, illegal transactions are constantly taking place. In this way, the GLA acquires extra weapons and equipment they can use to fight their enemies. Some of these weapons were armor-piercing bullets and rockets, which allowed the GLA to do more damage when using bullet or rocket-based weapon systems. They could purchase buggy ammo, which increases the ammo capacity of their rocket buggies. They could even purchase upgraded radar equipment for their radar vans, allowing them to conduct scans in a particular area. Shoes for their workers can also be purchased here, which let them efficiently gather more supplies. Sometimes the GLA just purchased junk from the market, which would be given to their vehicle crews. The crews used the extra scrap to make quick repairs to their vehicles. Even if the GLA did not make any major purchases at the market, they were still able to maintain a steady flow of income from other transactions taking place at it, about 20 American dollars worth per second. Although the GLA's primary structures were designed to blend into the surrounding community, it was still important to have defensive structures located nearby for protection. The first of these was the Stinger Site. To protect its bases against aerial bombardment, the GLA uses shoulder-launched Stinger missiles. Behind the barricade of sandbags at each Stinger Site, 3 soldiers can target inbound aircraft. When one soldier drops, the other 2 keep fighting until a replacement arrives. The Stinger Site was typically made up of a circle of sandbags with a camouflage net above it. Boxes of ammunition were kept in the middle. The name Stinger comes from the launcher, the FIM-92 Stinger, a man-portable air defense system, an American weapon, probably obtained from the Soviet-Afghan War years ago. Though the Stinger was designed for use against aircraft and not ground targets, the 3-man team could use their missiles to target and destroy ground forces too. The Stinger sites could also make use of armor-piercing rockets that were purchased at the Black Market. However, the site would be pretty useless if all 3 soldiers stationed there were killed, and the GLA had no way to reinforce it. The site could be upgraded with extra camo netting, which made it harder to see or detect by enemy forces. The GLA made use of extensive tunnel network systems. The entrances to these tunnels could be built almost anywhere, recognizable only by the sandbags and crates seen around them and the machine gun turret placed right above it. There were typically 2 RPG troopers guarding the entrances as well. The tunnel network entrance could be upgraded with camo netting, which camouflaged it from enemy forces. These tunnels allowed the GLA to hide their forces underground or in the mountains. That way, they did not have to worry about being attacked out in the open, especially by aircraft. While inside, their forces could use the underground network to rapidly move from one location to another. Vehicles inside the tunnels could be repaired, and infantry could receive medical attention. The tunnels were not totally immune from attacks by hostile forces, though. Aircraft equipped with bunker buster bombs could clear out units inside of them. In addition, if all the tunnel entrances in a region were destroyed, then any units that were inside of them would be buried underground. Although most tunnel entrances were created by workers starting from the surface of the Earth, some were made by workers digging up to the surface from underground. 5-star GLA generals used this tactic to perform a sneak attack in the middle of an enemy base, or to reach a location, such as an island, without crossing a bridge. It took a few moments for the tunnel entrance to be fully prepared and opened after reaching the surface, time that an enemy general could use to destroy the entrance before GLA forces had a chance to exit the tunnel. Another simpler defensive weapon that the GLA used were demo traps. The demo trap was basically an IED, one that had the option to either be manually detonated using a remote device, or had a proximity fuse. The proximity fuse caused it to automatically detonate whenever an enemy unit got too close. The trap typically came in the form of a barrel, which was filled with fuel, and had explosives attached to the outside of it. These traps were buried just below the surface of the Earth, and were useful for slowing down and delaying enemy forces attempting to make advances in a region. They were best placed along key road routes, or vital choke points. One would know when the trap was triggered by the distinctive beeping sound it made right before exploding. Cautious enemy forces could detect the traps and either destroy the explosives directly by firing on them, or use a bulldozer or other worker to dig up the traps and attempt to disarm them. One of the most powerful weapon systems in the GLA arsenal, the Scud Storm, was a super weapon that would launch 9 Scud missiles at a targeted location. Each missile carried an anthrax-derived toxin that would poison the air in the vicinity where the missile landed. This also meant that the missiles did not need to accurately land on the target to do significant damage. Once constructed, the launcher's missiles needed to be filled with fuel and toxin. In the middle of the launcher system is a tank where the toxin is held. 3 other buildings can be seen against a wall at the back of the launcher system. One seems to be a radar or weather station, and another looks to be a bunker that personnel use to view the launch from. The system takes about 15 seconds to launch its entire payload. Whatever mechanism the GLA uses to activate the launch sequence requires that all 9 Scuds be launched at once. If the launcher is destroyed before launching all its missiles, then only the number that was launched will land at the target location. So if only 2 Scuds are able to fire off before the launcher is destroyed, then only those 2 missiles will arrive at their destination. It took the Scud Storm some time to be rearmed before launching again. The launch mechanisms would be taken underground, then re-emerge equipped with the new salvo of Scud missiles. The missiles can be filled with a more potent variant of toxin called Anthrax Beta, which was represented by a blue cloud instead of a green one. Another defensive tactic employed by the GLA was the use of fake structures. As the name implies, these were decoy versions of the command center, supply cache, barracks, arms dealer, and black market. They matched the real versions of these structures in their appearance, but had no function whatsoever. If needed, the GLA could convert one of these decoys into a real one, assuming they had the money to make that conversion. Alternatively, the decoys were equipped with explosives that could be remotely detonated if enemy forces got too close to them. One way to tell if a structure was fake was the amount of damage that it could take before it was destroyed. Since decoys were not built with as strong materials as the real versions they mimicked, they were destroyed faster and did not leave behind a GLA hole. For the GLA's infantry, they had various roles to fill for those who wished to fight on behalf of the organization. All infantry units were trained to pick up salvage from wrecked vehicles. This salvage would usually be sold for additional funds, or the soldier that picked it up would receive a promotion for doing so. Infantry units were even trained to drive combat cycles. Some members were not as willing to fight for the GLA's cause compared to others. These members were simply called the workers.
I will work.
One of the most important roles, yet the least well treated, the worker was tasked with gathering supplies from supply docks or elsewhere, and delivering them to the stash for processing. They also had the vital task of constructing and repairing the GLA's buildings. Some workers would take cover in a hole beneath a structure. That way, if it was destroyed, the worker could emerge from the manhole and rebuild it. The worker was also tasked with setting up demo traps against enemy forces. In addition, they were given metal detectors to find mines or other explosives to dig up from the earth. If a GLA general wanted to increase the efficiency of his workers, he could purchase shoes for them at the black market. These shoes allowed the workers to not only move faster, but also increase the rate at which they constructed buildings and gathered supplies. One worker would normally only carry about $75 worth of supplies, but with shoes, he could carry about $83 worth. The issue with workers, however, is that other than a pickaxe or hammer, they are completely defenseless and could be killed quite easily. To protect them, the GLA had a standard rifleman-type soldier, simply known as the Rebel.
Ready for war!
The GLA Rebel has more spirit than training or equipment. The basic unit of infantry for the GLA carries a simple rifle. While Rebels did not have the extensive training of other basic infantrymen such as the USA's Rangers or China's Red Guard, they were cheap to recruit and arm, typically carrying an AK-47 rifle. The Rebels could garrison civilian structures to give themselves extra protection against attacking enemy forces. The Rebels could even be given extra training and explosives. The extra training allowed them to capture neutral tech buildings such as oil derricks or even enemy base buildings. The extra explosives could be used to booby-trap these neutral buildings, or their own. Rebels could be equipped with camouflage uniforms from the palace, assuming the local GLA general had the money to purchase them. When wearing these camouflage uniforms, the Rebels would be hidden, as long as they were standing still and not firing their weapons, which allowed them to set up ambushes on unsuspecting enemies. A 3-star GLA general could even request a group of rebels outside the battlefield to sneak onto it and ambush enemy forces, or even infiltrate an enemy base. This tactic was represented by a support power called Ambush. The number of rebels that would show up to the ambush depended on its rank. With rank 1, only 4 rebels would appear. At rank 2, 8 would appear. And at rank 3, 16 would appear. Lastly, if a GLA general purchased armor-piercing bullets at a black market, then he could pass this type of ammo out to his rebel infantry. This ammo granted them an increase in their weapons' firepower, which allowed them to be more effective against enemy infantry, and even light vehicles such as supply trucks. Even with armor-piercing bullets, the rebel, like most basic infantry, could not properly take on armored vehicles, such as tanks or aircraft. The role of anti-armor operations was designated to the RPG Trooper.
Guarding the GLA underground!
As its name suggests, the RPG Trooper carried an RPG-7, a shoulder-mounted rocket-propelled grenade launcher. The Trooper could use this weapon against both ground vehicles and aircraft. Just like the Rebels, the RPG Troopers could garrison civilian buildings to better defend themselves from attacks, or lock down a strategic location. 2 RPG Troopers would show up to guard the entrance of a tunnel network right after its construction was complete. A GLA general could increase the firepower of his troopers by purchasing anti-tank rockets for them at the black market. If a GLA general wanted a soldier packed with more explosive power than an RPG Trooper, they would recruit a terrorist.
I am prepared!
The most fanatical members of the GLA, willing to give up their lives for the cause. Strapped with several kilos of C4, these suicide bombers could destroy a tank in one blast, or cause heavy damage to civilian or military structures. They could trade places with a rebel on a combat cycle, thereby allowing them to quickly speed past defenses and hit a target before the enemy could stop them. If no combat cycles were around, the terrorists could always acquire a civilian car or truck, making a car bomb. Not only was the car faster than simply running, it also created a slightly bigger explosion. Terrorists were not the only ones who could make use of vehicles, though. The GLA would sometimes recruit specialists who knew how to acquire more than just a simple car or truck. This specialist was called the hijacker.
Let's go car shopping.
These daring thieves have been recruited to steal vehicles for the GLA. When he is idle, the hijacker blends invisibly into the crowd. When he is directed to attack, he jumps into a vehicle, kills the driver, and takes control of the wheel. Able to take out not only the driver, but the entire crew, the hijackers were experts at stealing light and heavy armored ground vehicles. After taking the driver's seat, they would have other GLA troops come in to help operate the stolen vehicle. The hijacker was only able to blend in with the crowd or hide from plain sight when they were standing idle. Once they made a run for a vehicle, they could be spotted and possibly killed before reaching their target. They would also avoid trying to steal vehicles, such as the Humvee or troop crawler, if they were garrisoned with infantry. Hijackers were confident in taking out standard vehicle crews, but not if they had other infantry to support them. The hijacker could sometimes escape from a vehicle that had been destroyed, particularly if it was an American vehicle. If they were able to gain veterancy while using a previous vehicle, they could pass that experience on to the next one that they hijacked. The hijacker was the GLA specialist at infiltrating vehicles, but it was the saboteur who they called upon to infiltrate enemy base buildings.
I have learned their ways.
The saboteur was trained in stealth and sabotage. He could move swiftly and was equipped with a rope and carabiner, which allowed him to climb cliffs. Once inside the base perimeter, the saboteur could enter any building to sabotage it. If entering a power plant, he would shut down the base's power for about 30 seconds. When entering a supply center, he would steal up to $1,000 in funds. If entering a production or strategic center, such as a barracks, tank factory, airfield, strategy center, or internet center, he would shut them down for 15 seconds to 30 seconds, depending on the type of structure. If he was able to infiltrate a superweapon building, such as the particle beam cannon or nuclear missile silo, he would reset the weapon's launch timer. A similar outcome would happen if the saboteur was able to infiltrate a command center. The enemy general would find that the timers for their support powers had been reset. Unfortunately for the saboteur, he was completely defenseless, so if he was spotted by the enemy, he had no way of defending himself. Sometimes the GLA needed a more direct and chaotic method of dealing with enemy forces in their area. For this, they would incite the local populace to riot, resulting in an enraged mob that would attack their enemies. An angry mob typically consists of 10 people. If any members of the mob are killed, they will slowly recruit new ones to replace them. Each mob member is armed with either a pistol, submachine gun, or Molotov cocktails. The local GLA general could arm the mob with more powerful AK-47 rifles.
AK-47s for everyone!
In addition, the rifles could make use of armor-piercing bullets bought from the black market. The angry mobs were highly effective at taking out most ground forces, including a tank if the mob concentrated its fire on one. When working together, 3 or 4 mobs could level an entire base, if proper defenses were not set up to stop them. Anti-infantry defenses such as China's Gatling turret, or American Rangers armed with flashbang grenades were best used to kill and disperse the mobs. Helicopters were also useful for dealing with mobs, as they wouldn't shoot at aircraft. The last soldier that the GLA would recruit and use for special operations was a man named Jarman Kale.
I don't care who they are. Business is business.
Jarman Kale was a highly skilled mercenary sniper. He only risked revealing his position whenever he would take a shot, shots that he practically never missed. The man was such a good marksman that he could kill the driver of any ground vehicle. Once the driver was taken out, other GLA soldiers could move in, finish off the rest of the crew, and take the vehicle for themselves. Jarman Kale could also make use of the GLA combat cycle, outfitting it with dual sniper rifles, which he could use to deadly effect against infantry, and still allow him to snipe out the driver of a ground vehicle. Whenever a soldier, such as a rebel, garrisons a building, it doesn't take long for enemies to figure out which building that rebel is in. But Jarman Kell was skilled enough to remain completely hidden inside a building, with enemy forces having no clue of his location. This allowed him to cause heavy casualties on enemy infantry, especially in urban environments. Enemy generals would make use of stealth detecting countermeasures in an attempt to find and kill him. Both USA and PLA forces claim to have killed Jarman Kell on multiple occasions across the two major conflicts against the GLA. During Operation Nuclear Winter, Chinese forces reported that they had killed him in their assault on Dushanbe in Tajikistan, or Aldistan as it was known by the GLA. During Operation Black Gold, the USA reported that he had been killed in the Amisbad oil fields in Iran. At one point during the zero-hour conflict, the GLA were engaged in a temporary fight amongst themselves. One of these engagements, known as Hidden Agenda, involved an unknown GLA commander fighting against Prince Kassad. Kassad had hired Jarman Kell to protect his command center, and supposedly, the mercenary sniper was killed when the attacking GLA forces raided Kassad's base. The last report of Kell's death was during Operation Burning Skies, when the PLA tried to cut off retreating GLA forces around the town of Halberstadt in Germany. This was the last time that Jarman Kell was seen and reportedly killed, as the war would come to an end shortly afterward. However, up to this point, all previous claims of his death had been proven to be false, as he continued to show up on different battlefields throughout the war. So it would be no surprise if, again, this final report of his death was incorrect, and the man found a way to survive and make it out of the former GLA strongholds in Europe. The GLA had a variety of vehicles in their arsenal. While normally unable to stand up to the more powerful ones fielded by the PLA and USA, it would be a mistake to underestimate the lightly armored but fast-moving vehicles of the GLA. Some of their vehicles also had the unique ability to salvage parts from other wrecks in order to upgrade their own. The first and probably the most widely used vehicle in the GLA arsenal was the Technical.
Bolted down and ready!
The Technical was basically a pickup truck, outfitted with a heavy machine gun on the back. It could move fast and cover a great distance in a short amount of time. It also acted as an impromptu transport that could carry up to 5 GLA soldiers. The soldiers were unable to fire their weapons from it, but they could bail out of the vehicle if it was destroyed. The machine gun on the back could be used to take out infantry and other light vehicles. The weapon also made use of armor-piercing bullets from the black market. Some GLA generals opted to give their technical crews extra training on how to properly operate and use the vehicle, making them a bit more effective during engagements. The Technicals could upgrade their primary weapon by salvaging the wrecks of other vehicles. The vehicle crew would use the salvage to make a grenade launcher to replace the machine gun. This launcher was more effective at destroying light vehicles and infantry, especially with the small amount of splash damage it caused. From here, more salvage could be used to upgrade the grenade launcher to a rocket launcher, which is more effective against vehicles, including tanks. While the Technical made for a decent scout, there was a more effective and versatile vehicle the GLA could use for that role, the Combat Cycle.
Cliffs, let's do it!
The Combat Cycle was a dirt bike that could travel extremely fast and even scale cliffs. Its speed and maneuverability also made it great for hit-and-run tactics. By default, a rebel drives the cycle, which allows the vehicle to be equipped with dual machine guns on the front of it. However, other infantry types could take over the driver's seat. An RPG trooper equips the cycle with a rocket pod on the right side, making it somewhat effective against vehicles. A terrorist arms the cycle with a demolition pack, which is effective against vehicles or structures. As previously mentioned, Jarman Kell himself could make use of the cycle and equip it with dual sniper rifles, which were deadly against infantry and still allowed him to take out vehicle crews. Workers, saboteurs, and hijackers could also operate the combat cycle, but they don't provide it with any mountable weapons, opting instead to use it to get somewhere fast. At any point, an infantryman could dismount the cycle, in which it would fall apart shortly afterward. While the combat cycle was quite versatile in its armament, depending on the rider, the vehicle itself had little to no armor, and could be easily destroyed by most enemy units or base defenses. The cycle was also incapable of shooting at aircraft. That role was left to the only dedicated anti-aircraft vehicle in the GLA arsenal, called the quad cannon.
I'll puncture the next thing that moves.
Acquired through the arms dealer, these Soviet-era weapons can protect GLA units from airborne attack. Equipped with 4 heavy machine guns, the quad cannon can target both air and ground units. By Soviet era, I think they are referring specifically to the actual gun, and not the entire vehicle. The vehicle itself is just a half-track with a flatbed, but on top of the flatbed were 4 23mm autocannons, which were originally equipped on the ZSU-23-4 Shilka. The vehicles were relatively cheap for an arms dealer to build, and they could easily mow down infantry and take out aircraft, especially helicopters. With armor-piercing bullets, they could even do a fair amount of damage to some ground vehicles. It had a decent amount of armor for a light vehicle, but was not as fast as others like the Technical or Buggy. The vehicle could upgrade its cannons by salvaging parts found on the battlefield. This salvage could be used to increase the cannon's rate of fire, allowing them to put more rounds down range. The quad cannon wasn't as effective against infantry that were garrisoned in a building. For clearing infantry from buildings, the GLA used a deadly vehicle called the Toxin Tractor.
Intoxicating.
From several onboard tanks, the Toxin Tractor releases a vicious poison that can contaminate the ground for a period of time, inducing illness and even death in infantry that touch it. When parked, the tractor can continuously contaminate the area, creating an effective defense against enemy personnel. The vehicle itself was basically just a civilian tractor that was outfitted with armored plates, and tanks which held the toxin. The toxin used by the tractor was a highly lethal form of anthrax, which is what made it so deadly to infantry. The toxin was so corrosive that it could even damage light vehicles, but was less effective against heavier armored ones. The toxin could be improved to become even deadlier, with the new strain called Anthrax Beta, recognizable due to its blue color. Like other GLA vehicles, the driver of the tractor could make use of salvage in order to upgrade it. This involved increasing the size of the tractor's gun, and adding 2 more smaller gun barrels on each side of the main one. This increased the amount of toxin the tractor could spray at its enemies. The downside to the tractor was that it was very slow, and vulnerable to aircraft. It also had little effect on heavy armored vehicles like tanks. Additionally, it was ineffective against enemy base structures, unlike another light vehicle that could destroy them from long range using its rockets. This vehicle was the Rocket Buggy.
Roads? How boring!
This vehicle acted as the primary mobile artillery for the GLA. It was fast and agile, quicker than other mobile artillery systems, such as the USA's Tomahawk launcher and PLA's Inferno tank. Still, like other vehicles in the GLA arsenal, it was lightly armored and vulnerable to aircraft. By default, the buggy was armed with 3 rocket pods on the back of it. Each pod carried 6 rockets, giving the vehicle a total of 18. While each individual rocket caused low damage, an entire volley of them could be devastating, especially to light or heavy armored vehicles. The rockets were also effective at destroying bases, as they could typically outrange most defensive structures. It took a while for the buggy to reload though, which made it vulnerable to retaliatory strikes. The buggy could cause more damage if it was equipped with armor-piercing rockets, even more so if a GLA commander purchased more buggy ammo from a black market. This replaced the 3 default cylindrical-shaped pods with 5 square-shaped ones. Each pod still held 6 rockets, but the total number the buggy carried was now 30 instead of the previous 18. This also meant an increase in the number of rockets it would launch in a single volley. Before a rocket buggy could attack and destroy an enemy base, it first needed to know its location, or at least have an idea of where to search. While the GLA did not have access to advanced radar systems like the USA or PLA, they were able to acquire older, but still useful equipment. Equipment that they kept in a vehicle aptly called the radar van.
Let us tune in.
The radar van could detect and keep an eye on enemy unit movements. The fact that the radar was kept in a mobile vehicle meant that if the local GLA general lost their command center, they could still keep track of hostile forces on the battlefield. Improved radar equipment could be purchased from a black market. This would allow the van to periodically conduct a radar scan of a specified location. This scan would be used to locate enemy bases or other military assets. It could even detect stealth units, such as the USA Sentry drones. The van itself was completely unarmed. Although it could take shelter inside a tunnel network, it would lose its reception while underground. Once a radar van had detected hostile forces, the GLA could send out their own forces to confront them. When it came to armored vehicles, the primary tank in their arsenal was the Scorpion tank.
Scorpion, ready to sting.
These light and ancient tanks are a vital leg of the GLA hit-and-run attack strategy. Fast and lightly armored, the Scorpion is a poor match against heavy weapons. It's interesting how the Scorpion tanks are described as ancient. This is probably because they do sort of resemble a World War II Italian tank called the P-26-40. How the GLA acquired such tanks, which would have to be rare, is unknown. Some old World War II tanks, such as the American M4 Sherman or German Panzer IVs, found their way to the Middle East years after the war. So perhaps that is how the GLA came to acquire some P-26s, and then built their own modified versions of the tank based on the originals, which resulted in the Scorpion tank. While the Scorpions were outmatched by the standard tanks of the USA and PLA, they were cheap to construct, and could be equipped with additional upgrades. Scorpion rockets could be purchased from an arms dealer and outfitted on the tank's turret. These rockets were effective against ground targets, and gave the Scorpion a much-needed boost in firepower. AP versions of the rockets could be purchased at a black market. The tanks could also be equipped with toxin shells that were developed at a palace. These shells made the Scorpions more lethal against infantry. The toxin inside the shells could even be upgraded to Anthrax Beta. Like other GLA vehicles, the Scorpion tank crews could use salvage to further upgrade it. This salvage would typically be used to improve the vehicle's main gun, and add a second Scorpion rocket to its turret. These upgrades would put the tank's lethality on par with that of the PLA's Battlemaster and the USA's Crusader tanks. Some GLA generals would field a medium tank that could go toe-to-toe with those of the USA and PLA. This was the Marauder tank.
What can I say? I'm a taker.
The Marauder tank seems to be a specially made vehicle offered by certain arms dealers. It was slower, but more well armed and armored compared to the Scorpion. One thing to note about the Marauder was that it could not rotate its turret. The entire vehicle had to turn in order to face the direction it wanted to fire. Just like the Scorpion tank, the Marauder could make use of toxin shells that could be upgraded with Anthrax Beta. Additionally, Marauder crews would use salvage to improve their tank. Some of it was used to improve the vehicle's main gun, increasing its rate of fire. Additional salvage allowed the crews to equip the vehicle with twin cannons, further increasing its firepower and reload speed. The twin cannons also meant the tank had a larger turret to accommodate them. When fully upgraded with salvage and a veteran crew, the Marauder was a formidable tank on the battlefield. But for those GLA generals who wanted a vehicle with more explosive firepower, they would use the bomb truck.
GLA Postal Service.
The bomb truck was basically a more powerful, vehicularized version of the Terrorist, one that was highly effective against structures or groups of units. It was a dump truck that had extra armor plating attached to it, which made it difficult to destroy when compared to a car bomb or terrorist-driven combat cycle. The driver of the truck was just as fanatical as the Terrorist. By default, the back of the truck was loaded with a variety of improvised explosives, but they could be equipped with a more powerful high-explosive bomb. The yield of such a bomb was double that of the entire default loadout. Instead of a high-explosive bomb, the truck could be loaded with a biobomb. When it explodes, it leaves behind a toxic cloud of anthrax, which of course is quite lethal against infantry. As with other bioweapons, the toxin in the biobomb could be upgraded to carry the more lethal Anthrax Beta. The truck could be loaded with both a bio and high explosive bomb, making it as deadly as it can be. Normally, such a truck is easy to identify and destroy before it reaches its target destination, but the GLA would disguise these trucks to look like other vehicles. It could be disguised as a civilian vehicle, but it could also be disguised to look like other vehicles used by the USA and PLA.
That's an easy disguise.
The other two factions had methods to uncover the disguised truck, but by then it might be too late to stop it. GLA generals that wanted a weapon system that could destroy units and base buildings from afar, but that also carried a high explosive warhead, would acquire a Scud launcher. Another Soviet weapon system from the Cold War, the MAZ-543 carries a large Scud ballistic missile on top of it. The vehicle was extremely slow and lightly armored. If it was able to get set up into position, it would launch its missile straight into the air. Once launched, its trajectory can't be altered. A few seconds later, the missile will come down on the designated target, doing a great deal of damage. The missile itself can be equipped with one of two different warheads. By default, it has a high explosive warhead that is highly effective against structures. The second warhead type is an anthrax warhead that spreads toxin around the impact site, making it more effective against infantry. The GLA can use salvage to upgrade the Scud missile to improve both its range and explosive power. The last ground vehicle in the GLA arsenal was a troop transport called the Battle Bus.
Hey, be careful with the upholstery.
As its name implies, the Battle Bus is just a large civilian van or bus that has been retrofitted for battle. The armament consists of up to 8 troops, usually rebels or RPG troopers, that ride in it and fire their weapons out the windows at hostile targets. This makes the bus a fast and lethal vehicle for hit-and-run attacks. With salvage, the GLA can make the bus more durable, and even add a metal ram on the front of it, making it more effective at running over infantry. What separated the bus from other transport vehicles was that even if the engine or wheels were taken out, the whole of the vehicle could still be used as a bunker, allowing the troops inside to continue firing their weapons. If the immobile wreck was destroyed though, then all the infantry left inside died with it. If the hull managed to survive an attack, it was not worth repairing back to a drivable state due to the heavy damage, so it was sometimes best for surviving troops to just abandon it once the hostiles surrounding the wreck had been cleared. While the GLA did not have a navy, they did make use of small patrol boats to transport their infantry along the coasts, or infiltrate harbors that were controlled by hostile forces. The boat was only armed with a machine gun, which was crewed by a rebel. Notable uses of the boat were during the Hong Kong crisis, where a GLA patrol boat was spotted moving away from the Singma Bridge. The GLA troops on the boat were responsible for planting explosives on the bridge and destroying it while PLA forces attempted to cross it. In addition, the GLA used the patrol boat to bring Jarman Kell and a group of thieves to a US base somewhere along the coast of California, a base they successfully infiltrated and stole a supply of biological weapons from. The small force then made their escape by stealing a C-130 cargo plane. The GLA didn't have much of an air force either, and what they did have consisted of one kind of plane. We don't know exactly what type of plane it was, however, some believe the design was similar to the Soviet Tupolev Tu-4. In any event, the plane could be used to either paradrop reinforcements at a reinforcement pad, or drop an anthrax bomb on an enemy base. As mentioned, high-ranking GLA generals could use the plane to drop an anthrax bomb. By default, the bomb was armed with anthrax beta. The bomb would explode right before hitting the ground, and the toxin would spread over a wide area, killing all infantry caught in its radius. The toxin was so corrosive and deadly that it could even kill crews inside of vehicles, if not the entire vehicle itself. The toxin would eventually dissipate, but not before having killed practically all living humans in the affected area. Depending on the rank of the GLA generals, they could request special units and other support call-ins from outside their area of operations. I've already talked about some of these, like the Rebel Ambush, Sneak Attack, Marauder Tank, and Anthrax Bomb. A 3-star GLA general could request emergency repairs. This support power would dispatch crews out to vehicles anywhere on the battlefield to provide them with fast and immediate repairs, even during the heat of battle. The repair crews had 3 levels based on experience and rank. These levels dictated how much repair work the crew could perform on the GLA vehicles. 5-star generals could gain access to a special piece of equipment called the GPS Scrambler. The Scrambler would, well, scramble enemy radar and spy satellites, allowing the GLA to hide a group of their forces. This meant that they were essentially stealthed and would remain hidden until opening fire on an enemy. However, their hidden forces could be located by stealth-detecting units or buildings. Originally, this technology was solely owned by Prince Kassad. Kassad kept the technology for himself, refusing to share it with the rest of the GLA. The GLA later sent one of their generals to attack Kassad, successfully retrieving the technology and allowing the entire faction to reap the benefits of its use. 3-star generals had the option to receive a cash bounty on any enemy units they destroyed, whether they be infantry, vehicles, or buildings. The general received a percentage of the cost of the destroyed unit. There were 3 levels to this bounty, with level 1 being worth 5% the cost of the destroyed unit, level 2 worth 10%, and level 3 worth 20%. There you have it, General. A detailed overview of the Global Liberation Army. More information on the GLA's famous generals, Dr. Thrax, Prince Kassad, and Radal Jazi, will be provided to you in the future, including information regarding the unique capabilities and arsenals that they brought to the faction. While the Global Liberation Army may no longer be around, their war against the USA and China caused both nations to join forces in order to defeat them. While the combined might of these nations ultimately prevailed in the end, the GLA still proved themselves to be one of the most formidable and feared organizations of the 21st century.